Everybody, welcome. This is episode 28 of my podcast, and today I'm very pleased to welcome Jonathan Hetreed of Hetreed Ross Architects, who are based in Bath. Jonathan, welcome and thank you for joining us. If you could introduce yourself and your lovely business to us, please.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yes, I'm Jonathan Hetreed. Hetreed Ross Architects are a small practice based near Bath, RIBA chartered, of course, and we're environmental specialists. We work on new, existing and historic buildings across the southwest and occasionally further afield. There are 7 of us at present, and we concentrate on individual bespoke projects where our clients are the users of their buildings, intent on getting those essential details just right. Most of our projects are residential, where our clients are committed to achieving the closely tailored personal results that make so much difference to the essence of home. Though we bring the same close attention to detail to our bespoke commercial and community projects. Whether in our homes, our workplaces or our community spaces, there's immense delight and satisfaction in achieving the environmental transformation of our buildings. Delight in the qualities of space, light and materials, as well as in the comforts and economies of effective environmental design. And that's transformative both for our own lives and for our planet. And for most of us, the realization of a new or retrofitted eco-build project will quite literally be the greatest contribution to our world's survival that we can make, as well, of course, one of the most exhilarating personal journeys you can take.
Absolutely.
Many of our clients are embarking on their first significant building project, and the role of client is so vital. Some take to it naturally, while some find it more daunting. And we're well practiced in training our clients where they need us to do so. And the RIBA also has helpful advice on their website for clients on how best to undertake the role.
Yes.
Hetreed Ross have 4 critical skills essential in achieving the best results in 21st century projects. And the first of these is deep listening. We take this very seriously. Of course, our clients take us on for our skills and design capabilities throughout the project. But those first stages of hearing our clients' aspirations and of evolving these into an effective brief are vital. It's your project, and we need to hear and respond to your needs and aspirations in depth.
Absolutely.
Second one is achieving rewarding consents in often difficult contexts. Now, long experience of thorough work with planners and listed building officers in the most sensitive situations of conservation areas and our very own World Heritage site here in Bath.
Yep.
Lateral thinking, tact, firm resolve to achieve the best consents in the circumstances. And of course, once planning consents or listed building consents are achieved, there are all the diverse and vital details for achieving building regulations consents, which finally are beginning to catch up with environmental needs via the future home standards.
Yeah.
Now, the third one is thorough and effective understanding of environmental design principles and the details needed to get construction all the way to passive house standards, which is our typical standard for all new work, where building at those levels of insulation and airtightness makes straightforward economic sense. Whereas the upgrades and refurbishments and conversions are trickier and definitely more expensive, but we aim for the best achievable equivalence there, backed by a grasp of how to realise the results most effectively on site for project quality.
Yeah.
And then lastly, we have the firm grip of procurement and construction that makes us as effective on the site as in the studio. And it's very important to say that teamwork solves problems as they arise for best results, fewest callbacks and lowest costs. And combining the highest ethical standards with respect and good communication with consulting and contracting teams earns us recommendations from contractors and consultants that we value highly. Consents. long experience of working in varied contexts, including with historic buildings,
Hmm.
has enabled us to work effectively with local authorities and the special interest groups to realise the appropriate environmental design quality and the added value that makes a project viable. From a new sixth form centre at a school in Bristol,
Yep.
via winning an appeal for a contemporary eco house in Bath, then 4 new canal-side townhouses on the Kenneton Avon,
Hmm.
a new oak-framed pool house for a Grade 1 listed country house in Wiltshire,
Yeah.
a contemporary extension to an urban museum for the Bath Preservation Trust. There's a client to grapple with.
Yes.
A hard-fought planning committee approval for the eco-renovation and development of a derelict industrial site in a rural conservation area. Quite a mouthful, and it was
Yes.
certainly a project. A crisply contemporary glass-walled extension to a listed farmhouse in Kent,
Yep.
which is
Which
on
we've
which you've
featured.
featured,
Yes. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And then no less than 8 successful applications for internal, external, and landscape alterations to a listed country house at Causley. We have the experience of success at consents that makes a difference.
Yeah.
Environmental design, appropriate environmental design needs to be integral to a project from the start. The technical accessories, such as the photovoltaics and the heat pumps, have their place, of course, though much shorter lives than the buildings they serve.
Mm.
But unless the fundamentals are right, aspect, insulation, airtightness, thermal mass, both initial and ongoing costs can become prohibitive.
Mm.
It's a fundamental aspect of successful, sustainable projects that design, construction, and especially services systems are kept simple and intelligible, both for our clients and for those maintaining the systems in the future. So maximising the effect while minimising the complications. And then construction, whether in design and build, traditional or management contracting, respect between team members is vital to the end product and the bottom line,
Yeah.
as well as to our clients' enjoyment of life and our own.
Yes.
Good communication, mutual appreciation of skills make for a better team and better results, the winning scenario. I worked on site for 2 years after I left college on several conversion and eco-renovation projects from Sussex to Wiltshire to Dorset, and I'm so glad I did.
Yeah.
As well as the invaluable experience of handling and installing so many materials and components, it allowed me to appreciate just how demanding is a good contractor's role. The construction industry's environmental learning curve is really steep, but we have the experience and the understanding to work with the other consultants and contractors at every level to achieve the appropriate building for the environmental standards required. So Hetreed Ross provide total solutions for value-adding consents, appropriate environmental design, and successful construction.
Well, that is the portfolio of, you've been going since 1997, so coming on 30 years. The portfolio of work that you've just described in your summary there, and obviously the near 3 decades of experience, the practice alone, coupled with your prior experience when you were younger, when you left college and you were on the tools, shall we say, more so, is fabulous. And actually, picking you up on a couple of things there, you mentioned there's 7 members of staff within the business.
Yeah.
Are they all of senior level, or do you tend to take on the graduates, the youngsters that are coming up through the ranks as well? How's the kind of setup of the practice?
It's a mix. At the moment, we're probably too many at the senior level.
Yep. Yeah.
But no, we've got Part 2 students. We tend to occasionally take on work experience students, but not very often because there's a lot of commitment involved there.
Of course. Yeah.
But we take on Part 2 students, and we've got an almost architect. He did his professional practice exams earlier this year, and he should be getting registered very soon. So we've got kind of both the junior and senior level in the practice.
That's really good. And the juniors, do you actively encourage them to be out on site as often as possible and to, actively encourage them to be involved from all stages right through? Is that
Yeah,
something you?
absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, Lyndon, who's our virtually architect,
yeah,
nearly registered, is very keen on the tools. And
yeah,
before he came to work for us, he worked for other practices, but he also spent time working in a joinery workshop and, has done contracting work. And
yeah,
he's now got his own little flat development project that he's, doing
yeah,
part time.
yeah.
So we do very much encourage that. And a couple of years ago, one of our sort of more senior architects, she said to us, "I really would like to get some site experience." So we did a sort of part-time bit where she went off and worked with a good contractor a
Okay.
day a week
Yeah.
on their sites. Obviously, you have to work with a good contractor rather than
Yes.
the
Yeah.
less good.
Yeah.
But it's really important, I think, to get
Yeah.
familiarity. I mean, how can you go and talk to contractors on site about what they should be doing if you haven't done it yourself and you
I
don't
agree.
understand and appreciate, what it's like?
However, you would be surprised at how many don't have that experience and they don't get the exposure that you offer.
Yeah.
And it's a huge stumbling block. I've spoken to so many people. I've been involved in the world of architecture myself for nearly 30 years. And I think it's crucial. The way that you are doing things, I think, is absolutely correct in the manner in which you conduct yourselves. And to have that vast and varied experience is absolutely critical. When you're speaking to your own clients as well, you want to be able to say, well, look, I'm confident with dealing with planners or, whatever it may be. Somebody that can comfortably come across as really knowing what they're on about.
Yeah, and some clients have a lot of knowledge themselves, and they're often very familiar with details of their own buildings,
Yeah,
and so you want to have that kind of, in-depth conversation about some particular detail and how the way it could be resolved and so on. If you haven't been involved in the doing, then it's
yes,
much
yeah,
more difficult. And so I'll draw it for you, but that's not the same as
no.
getting
With
hold of it.
with planning then, because obviously I talk to practices from London to Scotland and all around the country basically. But particularly in Bath, I know you mentioned you've obviously worked across in Kent and in the main though it's obviously Bath and surrounding areas. With Bath being an area of outstanding natural beauty and the
Yeah.
certain environmental impacts, I presume your main council you use is it Baines or do you?
Yes.
It's Baines, yes. Do you find planning more restrictive than perhaps when you work across in the likes of Kent and elsewhere, or how
It,
do
it
you?
varies widely, and because we're dealing mainly with small projects, they each tend to have their own single officer assigned
Okay,
to them.
yeah,
So they don't work with a team, there's just an individual.
I see.
And until you know who's assigned, you really can't predict what their attitudes are going to be because every planning or listed building officer has their own individual preferences.
Of course, yeah,
Does make it difficult for clients because you can't say to them, this will work or this will get consent
yeah,
because you don't know until you've gone forward at least to pre-application stage.
yes, yeah. But I presume you are obviously very well known, and it helps to have 30 years standing behind you, I would imagine.
Yeah, yes, it does help. Yeah.
So moving on to kind of the size of the practice and projects you're working on, and any historic ones that stand out that you are particularly proud of that you want to talk about that you're
Well,
that are really standout projects.
there's one which I didn't sort of refer to in the earlier on because it's quite complicated to describe, but it's a
Yeah.
project for a local charity called Jamie's Farm,
Okay.
and we did their first farm. They run a agricultural therapy for school children in difficult
Yep.
stages.
Okay.
And they have 7 farms across the country. And we've done a couple past, and we're now just bringing towards completion their 8th farm. Their 7th farm.
Yeah.
And that's been remarkable, partly because it's a listed building. It's a charming, farmhouse on the edge of Bath.
Yeah.
But when they got into it, when we did the detailed survey of it, we found it was severely affected by death watch beetle,
Okay. Yeah.
which meant
Yeah.
that an enormous amount of its structural timber had to be removed and replaced.
Yeah.
So that's been quite a journey in terms of negotiations with the local listed building team.
Yeah.
Um, And of course, for a charity like that, there are many serious issues about costs and so on.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. What happens when you present them? The charity have got X amount of money they're expecting to or hopeful to have to spend. When you drop a bombshell like that, how does that affect the whole thing then? Because that's a huge thing to come up against, isn't it?
yeah, and I mean it's got to be negotiated. And the problem, I think, one of the problems there, because they wanted to get on site and get it underway and get it open for children as soon as they could.
Yeah.
But timing is not the easiest of issues with processes of getting listed building consent and things.
Yeah.
When schemes change, then timing tends to slip. So there's
Yes.
a constant battle to keep the program, and but we're getting there.
So with a listed building, then obviously the constraints are very different. But you come up against something like timber frame damage that needs repair and that was unexpected. What happens there then? Because you need to then replace in a different manner than you'd first thought, I
Yeah,
presume.
well, you typically, and indeed in this case, you get the listed building officer to come to site so that
Yeah.
she can see the extent of the damage. And ideally, and again in this case, you get the structural engineer who's wonderfully experienced to come to and explain to the listed building officer about the extent of incapacity and damage. A roof that's basically stone tiled roof, basically staying in place by friction, something highly liable to collapse.
Yeah.
And then you negotiate a sensible way forward in terms of replacement structure. I mean, there have obviously been lots, like most farmhouses, there have been lots of repairs and things in the past. So it wasn't all pristine, original, historic
Yeah.
structure. It was the usual mix.
Yeah.
And it takes negotiation and care and consideration and tact and so on, but you get there.
Yeah. And this is an ongoing project now, is it, or is this now
Yes.
complete?
Yeah.
Still go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Lovely. And what kind of obviously you've got 30 years behind you as a business, pretty much. What are the future? How do you see the future plans of the practice then, as you perhaps yourself look to retirement in the forthcoming so many years? What's how's the kind of setup? What's the plans for the business moving forward?
Well, we're still open to suggestions,
Yeah.
but we've long had an attitude that work should fit around people rather than people fitting around work. Because some
Very
of the
good.
people we
Yeah.
take on, they've worked in London for practices who said, "Well, you've got to stay all night and work
Yeah.
on," and that sort of thing. We don't. So we're much more flexible. And so most of us in the practice, not everybody, but most in the practice works part-time to some degree.
Okay.
So not 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And that I think works better. It makes for a more positive life. And
I would agree.
so,
Yeah.
yeah. So we hope to continue that and gradually let the practice evolve into
Yeah.
some form of follow-on succession, new ownership, and so on.
You do hear more so actually now, only in recent times as well. More so, more practices are now saying they're doing the 9-day fortnight. So perhaps longer days over this period, but it means
Yeah.
that every second Friday you have off, which is a very good compromise, I should say. And this is the London practice as well. They're doing that,
Yes.
which is brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
But
makes for a richer life, doesn't it, in terms of.
it really does, yeah. Have you seen things change yourself in a slightly more relaxed approach since COVID, or were you like this previously?
We were like it previously, and COVID, particularly I think at our scale, made life more difficult. I mean, clearly the degree of connection that one does online and so on and so forth helped enormously, but there's also a level of close team working that works better in the office. And there's also a level of awareness in terms of knowing what's going on across the board rather than just with your own individual job. That again works better in the office. So although it didn't happen immediately at the end of COVID restrictions, we're all back in the office and valuing that time.
Yeah, I think it's I agree with that. I think in your line of business, I think it is crucial to be able to, although you're not all working on the same projects, it's nice to be able to bounce ideas off each other and just have that And again, I think most practices around the country are all in together. Maybe the odd 1 or 2 days working remotely, but in the main,
Mhm.
and then drawing upon um, external support. You mentioned the likes of a structural engineer and what have you. You don't have an in-house structural engineer. Then it's somebody as a
No,
consultant
we
you
don't.
may use as and when.
Yeah, we work with half a dozen local structural engineers who all have their different specialisms and experiences, and similarly with services engineers and things. Um, Increasingly, I mean, we have had in the past some very adept and helpful services engineers on small projects. See,
Yeah.
most services engineers work on big projects, and if you offer them a single house to grapple with,
Yeah.
they not so not so impressed. But there are some who are in there. It's really vital because a lot of clients need that helping hand to let them grapple with the complexities of modern, environmentally
Yeah.
advanced building services.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so with you're based in Bath, with your reach, stretching quite far geographically. How do you how do you then manage that? Because obviously practices that have, that are based in one place but work across the country, they perhaps have other remote hubs elsewhere around the region. So how do you work then? You mentioned Kent, but if you were to work even as far as Cornwall, for example, it's a long way from Bath.
Yeah,
How do you manage that then if you're working remotely?
I mean, we have to be, upfront with clients about it, and there are obviously ways of, there tends to be more remote working that way. That way, you tend to restrict the number of site visits you have. Sometimes we work with a local agent to do
Yeah,
the contract administration, the site visits and so on. We
yeah.
did that successfully with clients for a project in Norfolk, where it
Okay.
wouldn't have made sense for us to
No.
go to and from the site every month.
Yeah,
But there are also ways in terms of using the trail, particularly if you can travel somewhere by train rather than by car, then you
yeah.
can, regain the time by preparing for the meeting on the way there and doing all the
Yes.
notes of it on the way back.
Yeah.
So there are always ways of making the best of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And uh yeah, well, I've lost my trail of thought. Um so no, in the main, obviously, most of your work is relatively local, but
Yeah.
your projects that we've alluded to already, some of those which you've mentioned, um, anything anything of significance coming forward that you have on potentially on the drawing board to discuss that's hopefully coming up?
Um, I mean, in many ways, the most exciting one probably is the one I've already mentioned for Jamie's Farm, because
Yes,
that, as
yeah,
well as the restoration of the listed building farmhouse, is involving some major aspects of, PV installations and biomass and things in the farm buildings, as well as running the farm. So I don't mean we're running the farm, they're running the farm,
yeah,
but it's due to open later this summer. So it's just on the sort of reaching the cusp of bringing it to life. Um,
yes, yeah.
and otherwise, we've got a range of small domestic projects, some of which are well, lots of variety, and that's what makes it appealing and exciting. Both variety in both in the buildings and of course in the clients.
Absolutely. So, with residential schemes, do you get involved at all in new builds, or is it all existing building extensions and so on and so
Occasionally new builds. I mean, generally, as lots of clients come to us and say, "I'm looking for a site, to build myself a new house,"
yeah,
and one has to say, well, good luck, because in this locality, viable sites for new builds are few and far between. So people are
yes,
much more likely to find a site with an existing building on it, which they can either perhaps demolish and rebuild, or may have to convert, and depending on whether it has any landscape or historic value.
yeah,
But yes, new builds are the exception rather than the rule. Most
absolutely, yeah.
projects involve some kind of level of adaptation or conversion or
And if there was a piece of land that is, remotely of interest at all, then there's going to be a billion people bidding for it, isn't there?
absolutely, yeah.
You see, yes, I see. I've often thought myself about doing something similar, But, you know, I am a one-man band. As soon as there's an area of land that's of relative interest, you know, the price goes sky high at auction, and you know, you've got no chance. And I don't have the it's, you know, companies will come in with the infrastructure and the cash. You need to be cash ready ultimately as well, don't you?